you, everyone. Thank you. I just thank you all for coming and looking forward to presenting this to everyone.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. And along with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, Wisdom, MICAH, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Wisconsin Council of Rabbis, we co-lead weekly conversations we have every Monday afternoon that we call Creating Beloved Community. And growing out of Creating Beloved Community are two projects taking a faithful stand for equity and Teach the Truth Wisconsin. So some of you folks have come to us through taking a faithful stand for equity, and that's really where this legislative tracking project is housed. But there's also some overlap with another project of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and the Wisconsin Council of Churches, the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign. So some of you may have come to tonight's meeting through an invitation from what we lovingly call WIVIC, or just from Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. So however you came to tonight's training, welcome. We're really delighted to see you all, and I am going to turn it over to our fearless leaders, Betsy Abramson, Rhonda Lindner, and Angie Hicks to lead us through tonight's training. And take it away, Betsy and Rhonda.
Okay. So I think we're going to start out by just introducing ourselves. Maybe we should do that, Rhonda, as we Okay, so I'm Betsy Abramson. I'm a member of Temple Bethel in Madison, Wisconsin. And I don't know what that rumbling buzzy is. I hope it's not coming from me. I think it's not my street repair, but anyway, so I'm a member of Temple Bethel and have been working on various issues of voting for a long time with members of our congregation. I also am retired about 2.5 years ago. I was a lobbyist during much of my career, working with on behalf of older adults, people with disabilities, and domestic violence victims. So that got me familiar in some ways with the legislature and the legislative process. So I am going to start out by giving you the basics of how a bill becomes a law. And Rhonda is going to pull up a document for us, and she's going to eventually put the whole document in the chat for us as well. It's a 12-page document of how a bill becomes a law, and we'll probably send it out to you also with the link for the recording. And I think you will find it very, very helpful when you go back to what does all these words mean. So Rhonda, if you can go to the page, if you can share your screen and go to the page that has the kind of cartoony part of how a bill becomes a law on it.
Sure. And I'd ask that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But I think after every person's individual presentation, we'll have time for, we're going to see if we'll have time for questions as well. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. Okay, so Rhonda, you tell me when you're ready to pop up that screen. Okay. I think this was once on Schoolhouse Rock or something like that, you know. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill or something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to show you in the cartoon version, and then on the next page, you'll see it in a more flowchart way. So you can meet Bill over there. Bill was, a bill comes from a legislator. A legislator, whether they're a member of our state assembly or our state senate, comes up with an idea, wants it to become law, and this can only be drafted by attorneys in the Legislative Reference Bureau. It's a nonpartisan legislative agency. They draft the bill, and if let's say that this bill is an assembly bill, as is the one that that Rhonda is going to be talking to us about in a few minutes, and it is then read by the chief clerk, and it goes for what's called its first reading. It's read in the assembly. Nothing happens past that first reading. It's immediately assigned to a committee. So the bill that we're talking about is about requiring the Department of Public Instruction to develop curriculum about Hmong Americans for use in the public schools. So what committee would this bill go to? Probably not health, probably not criminal justice, most likely, of course, education. So you can see in that middle panel in the top row, the committee then studies the bill and will hold a public hearing on it. So that's the first place a bill can get stuck. The chair of the committee can decide, I don't want this. I'm not going to schedule a hearing. So you might get an email from us saying, contact the chair of the education committee. This is who it is, and tell him or her to hold a hearing on it. So after the public hearing is held, then you can see it. Thanks, Rhonda. So the committee then votes on it. The fancy legislative word they use for voting is called execing. You'll hear, oh, is this set for executive session? Are they going to exec on it today? And that shows you're really in the know, because when they say exec on a bill, that means vote on it. The committee members up or down on this bill. And then after if it's voted down, nothing happens to it. It dies and it sits right there. If it's voted up, then the bill is referred to the Assembly, in this case, Assembly Rules Committee. Rules Committee is essentially the scheduling committee. And that Rules Committee can then either place it on the calendar for the whole Assembly, or they can sit on it and say, we don't like it, and we're going to just let it, wither on the vine right here. But usually it'll go forward, and then it goes for what's called its second reading. And during the second reading, Assembly representatives can talk back and forth. I like it. I don't like it. I'd like it if it said Tuesday instead of Wednesday. I'd like it if they said Department of Public Instruction has to do this within 3 months. I'd like it if they said they have to do it tomorrow, whatever. They can add amendments to it. And then once they're done with amendments, then it has its third reading. And you can see that in the left box. Thanks, Rhonda, in the left box in the middle row. And then it gets voted up or down with those amendments on it, as the amendments are taken first. If it doesn't pass, again, it dies. If it is passed, then it has to go through the same routine over on the other side. This bill that I used as an example started in the in the Assembly. So now it has to move over to the Senate side, and the bill will go through that same procedure. Where in the Senate are they going to send it? Probably to the Senate Education Committee. You want the Senate Education Committee to hold a public hearing. People will testify or register in support or opposed to it, or just for information. And they may actually say, I want to actually testify, and they will come and speak at the public hearing in favor or against it. And again, they can do amendments or not. Hopefully, if it's a bill you support, they don't make any amendments. They make it just like it passed in the Assembly, because it's best if the bill's the same on the Assembly and the Senate side. And if there are changes made, then there are extra procedures that are going to have to happen, called a conference committee, where the Assembly and Senate reps members come together to try to agree on one that each of their chambers will pass. So, and if there are amendments made, then the other house has to concur on that. So when now we're on the bottom row there, when the bill is accepted by both houses, the Assembly has passed it and the Senate has passed it, it's signed by the leaders of both those houses and then sent to the governor. The governor then has three choices. The governor can just let it sit for up to 6 or more days. And if the governor does nothing with it, it becomes law automatically. If the governor vetoes it in whole or in part, if the governor vetoes part of it, then the rest of the bill stands. If the governor vetoes the whole thing, then it's gone, unless both chambers can come back and what's called override the veto by having at least 2/3 of members of each house say, well, sorry, governor, you didn't like it, but 2/3 of us do. And if 2/3 of both chambers, Assembly and Senate, approve it, then it will become law automatically. And the third choice for the governor is just to sign it. And usually if the governor signs it, can you go up one page, Rhonda? One page up. Keep going a little bit higher. I'm sorry, I don't have the right page. Keep going. Anyway, when the governor signs it, there you go. When the governor signs it, it's a big deal. Usually they go out to wherever it is. If it was the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium or something, of course it would go to, he'd sign it probably wearing a Brewers hat and a Brewers shirt. This one, and when he signs it, if this goes through, it's about Among Americans, he'd probably go to Among American Center and sign it there. You see, the big thing there is that former Governor Walker is holding a pen there. And at the signing ceremony, those of us who were advocates for a bill try to show up and say, rah, rah, governor, and rah, rah, members of the Assembly and Senate who signed it, to show them that you were part of the force that made this happen. And the governor will sometimes go through 10 pens in signing it. Governor Evers has, he has 9 letters to his name. So he might sign the T and then hand that pen to somebody, he signs the O and hands that pen to somebody, the N, hands that pen to somebody, till he gets all the way through Evers. And it's a great thrill, if you've worked on a bill, to have the pen that the governor signed at least one letter of his, in our case, name with. So now, real quickly, Rhonda, if you can go back to down a couple pages, down to the page that has more of the flow chart on it, past this page, one more page, there you go. So this also is in the packet that you're going to get. And this shows you in more flowchart form what I had just explained. The Assembly bill, Rhonda, if you can put your cursor up there, it starts with a state representative. As I mentioned, it goes to the Assembly where it's read the first time, assigned then to a committee. This would have been education. The public hearing is held. Then the committee takes, what did we call it? Executive action, meaning they vote on it. And if the bill has any fiscal estimate, and you can guess even in this Among American Education bill, there will be a fiscal estimate, right? Because the Department of Public Instruction is going to say, we're going to have to assign staff who are going to have to work on this. And the school districts are going to say, we're going to have to send people to training to learn how to do it. And we're going to have to print all the curriculum materials about it. We may have to do in-services, blah, blah, blah. So if there's any fiscal estimate, the bill has to be what they call dipped into joint finance to have a joint finance voted up or down. Then it goes over to the Rules Committee again for the scheduling, the second reading where there's the debate and the amendments. Then it's set for the calendar. We're going to be voting on it this day, calendar engrossment. Hopefully, if it's a good bill we all like, it's passed. And then boom, boom, boom. This feels like chutes and ladders, doesn't it? Then it's messaged over to the Senate, back up to the top. Rhonda, if you can go over the top, and I won't wander all the way through that, but you see it goes through the very same things on the Senate side, all the way down to the bottom. Third reading, they concur, they send it over to the Senate, it's enrolled, and then you see, just go a little bit lower, Rhonda, and you can see what the 3 choices are that the governor has. Sign the law by just letting it sit there for 6 days, approve it, and then it's published by the Secretary of State in the official Wisconsin newspaper, which is the Wisconsin State Journal out of Madison, and then it's published there and then becomes law. Or, as I mentioned, the governor can veto it in whole or part. And if it's in part, the 2 chambers decide whether they want to try to muster the 2/3 vote to override the veto. So that's how a bill becomes a law in very short form. This wonderful little packet, if you want to go lower, Rhonda, you can see it has a glossary in there. So it explains, when you're looking at this, thinking about it later, what did that woman chatting so fast say? It gives you some of the different terms that are used, like executive session and lobbying and override and third reading and second reading and stuff like that. So this is a great little tool, this little booklet that tells you how a bill becomes a law. Okay. So I think somebody wrote in there that sometimes you can have a public hearing even without, but because of the public asking for it. And I believe that's true. Maybe no one knows the answer to that as well, or Bonnie. But I will stop there and turn it over to Rhonda. So Rhonda, if you could go off mute and then you're ready to go.
All right, and if there are a few questions, we have time before I get started. This way, if you...
Yeah.
All
Sorry.
right, yeah.
Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Real quick. So is there a strategic reason to start a bill in either the House or the Senate?
I think it depends on if you think you have, if the co-sponsor is, for example, if the co-sponsor is on a committee, and I'll ask Noah to weigh in on this too, because he was a former legislative aide, as you're going to hear. But if your co-sponsor was on the committee that's ultimately going to go to, I would start it on that chamber side, just because that person's gonna bug the chair to get it going and keep it going, and that would be, a positive thing. Today, with both the Assembly and the Senate being controlled by the same party, it's different than if you thought your bill was more attractive to Republicans or more attractive to Democrats, and one chamber was controlled by one or the other. That might influence. Noah, do you have some thoughts about that?
I think that's a great question. As you noted, right now, as the maps are and everything in Wisconsin, it's kind of one party control of the legislative branch, a different party, obviously, in the executive branch. The Assembly at times can be a little more chaotic, only because there's 3 times the number of people. There's just more folks, and they have fewer staffers in the office. I think your best hope is always to find that Assembly lead, Senate lead, and then you kind of see where they're who's you have that option, and then you'll see from there, with depending on the relationship, as Betsy was saying, with the committee chair, who's going to move the ball farther down the field, to jump to sports immediately, but and then see from there, because once it passes one chamber, it ideally would just pass unchanged in the other chamber and not have to go back and forth, because obviously both versions have to look the same as they pass before they head to the governor. So I think the answer to your question is not really, unless you have a feel for who's going to be my champion. Every interest group, every lobbyist, who's actually going to care about this. There are plenty of folks that say, yeah, I'll introduce the bill for you, and then that's the end of their involvement. That's less likely to get that hearing, get that committee vote. So it kind of depends on the level of engagement you think you can get from your lead sponsors.
So then that's really the real answer, Danielle, is who is your champion? Every one of us has one Assembly rep and one senator, right? In Wisconsin, as Noah mentioned, there's 99 Assembly reps, 3 Assembly districts assigned to every 1 Senate district. So there's only 33 senators, 99 Assembly rep. If you have a bill that you personally cared about, and you tried your Assembly rep and you tried your Senate rep, and your senator's interested, your Assembly rep is not, it's going to start in the senator. It's going to start in the Senate, because that's where your champion was. Other questions? Oops, this looks like there's 3 new messages. Okay. All right. Thank you. We have, keep your questions coming and put them in the chat as other questions arise, because we'll have time at the end. And I think Rhonda and Angie and I are, at least, and maybe Noah, are going to stick around to answer any other questions you have.
All right. Thank you, Betsy. And thank you, Betsy. Also, Betsy has been a true leader in this effort. And I want to say thank you in front of everyone for your leadership and your counsel in this. My name is Rhonda Lidner, and I'm the Interfaith organizer for the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, which is WIVIC. I also am the educator for Tikkun Ha'ir, a social justice organization in Milwaukee. And when Rabbi Bonnie was talking about this at one of our WIVIC meetings, I said, oh, well, I'll be part of the leadership team. And I said, but I don't understand any of this. So this is a great opportunity for me to sorry, I don't know how to disconnect my texts from my phone, my computer. And I didn't, I said, I don't really know how any of this works, but I want to learn. So it's been a great opportunity for me. And if there's any, if there's comfort in that, if this is confusing to you, I promise that we can make it unconfusing. It may not happen during this Zoom. So please know that if what we are presenting to you is still confusing, please let us know. And I am happy to have a one-on-one meeting with anyone to go through it a little bit slower, a little bit more individualized. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. You'll be getting an email from me in a few days with all of the links that will also be hopefully be put in the chat. And you'll be able to let me know that you would like to have a little more time. So, yes.
Sorry. One of the things I was supposed to mention and I forgot, and Noah's sports analogy reminded me of it, that the key issue here is who's got the ball, where's the ball? And you don't need to memorize what's happening next all the time, because we, Angie, Rhonda, and I are tracking these bills, as Rhonda's going to show you, and we'll be letting you know, it's stuck right here. This committee chair isn't scheduling a hearing, or, oh, they're about to exec on it. Now's the time to approach those people. Because the last thing we want to do is a bill that's still dangling in the assembly, has gone through an assembly, public hearing on the education side and is scheduled for a vote there, to tell you all to go grab your senator and say, vote for this bill, because it isn't anywhere near the Senate yet. So we don't want to look, dopey like that. And we'll be telling you where the bill is, where the influence point is, where it's sitting, to continue Noah's thing, what yard line it's on, and what you can do with it right then, and who the folks are. So understanding the process is great, and helps you understand why it's stuck or where something is, but it's not something you need to memorize, because we're going to be letting you know it's here now. This is the touch point. So the whole penny, call your legislator. We won't be doing that. We'll be saying, call your legislator if you're in this district, because that legislator sits on this committee where this is happening now.
Right. We definitely want to be mindful of your time and make sure that when we ask for some advocacy efforts, it's worth the while. It's worth your while. So I'm going to show you how to track a bill. And like I said, if you had asked me to present this, 3 months ago, I would have had no idea what was going on. So I have spent a couple months taking a deep dive into the legislature website, and it's user friendly, and it is actually quite intuitive. So I'm going to show you how I was able to learn how to track a bill. And this is, we have some documents. Okay. Let me just get to the right. So we have a document here that shows a bill that we are calling AB 282 and SB 240. AB means Assembly Bill, SB means State Bill. And as we go through the process of this one bill,
sorry, Rhonda, SB means Senate bill, not State bill.
You're right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And just,
Assembly
sorry,
bill.
one thing, Rhonda, the numbers, I believe, are just sequential based on when they were introduced in the session. That doesn't really mean anything. There's no value to it. It's just that was the 232nd bill introduced, because they'll first get circulated as an LRB draft, and then once they're approved, they'll get formally introduced, and they're just given the number based on where they are in the queue, like you were, lining up at a deli, take a number kind of thing.
Right. Thank you.
There's enough Jews on this call that they get that reference.
So we're looking at Assembly Bill 232, and we're using this as a model of a bill that we want to support. We're not here tonight to go to hash out the bill itself. We're just using it as an example of a bill that we are supporting, and it has made its way through a little bit. So we would send you a link to the bill that looks just like this, and you would click on the link, and it would get you to the state legislature website. All right. And here we see Assembly Bill 232. And the first thing we're going to ask is making sure you know what it's asking, what the bill is about. And this is directing school boards to provide instruction on Hmong Americans and Asian Americans in at different grade levels. So perhaps you'd like to know a little bit more about that bill there and where it is, what the history of the bill is, what's been happening. It's all here in these links. And don't worry, if you press the wrong link, nothing's going to happen to the bill. Nothing's going to happen to your computer. You just go back. So these are links where you are just doing research. You don't have any power in these links. These are all links that have already been established. If you take a look, the history of the bill is that it was introduced on April 20th, 2023. And then it was read the first time to the Committee on Education. And then we've had different representatives, added as co-authors, added as co-sponsors as well. And there is a public hearing that was held. And you can see that there's been many, these are the original introducers of the bill. And then the history of the bill has it being read in the Committee on Education. More people added as co-authors. There was a public hearing held, and I'm going to show you what that looked like. And then more senators and representatives added as co-sponsors and co-authors. And so the last action on this bill was in late August of 2023 when Senator Larson was added as a co-sponsor. Okay, so that's the history of the bill.
Rhonda, if I can just jump in there.
Sure.
One thing you know is if you click on any of those legislators' name, it'll go to their homepage. So I was just kind of nosy and I thought, well, I know that Francesca Hong, who's from Madison, is a Democrat. And when I clicked on some of these names, I saw that this bill got both Democrats and Republicans as co-sponsors. So that's going to be important in your messaging to say, this is a bipartisan bill.
Correct. Thank you. So if we go up to some of these links, we have the text of the bill itself. And I have to admit, I was sort of surprised how short it was. Okay. So you can read this. Current law requires each school board to provide an instructional program designed to give pupils an understanding of human relations, particularly with regard to American Indians, Black Americans, and Hispanics. This bill directs school boards to include to that instructional program information related to understanding human relations with regard to Hmong Americans and Asian Americans. Okay. And there's a little bit more there.
The reasons it's so short is that it's not coming up with a whole new procedure and whole new something. School districts are already required to include curriculum about these other groups. So it's a simple amendment to that statute that just says add in Hmong Americans too.
Right. Thank you. So I was very grateful that it was short and very easy to read. It was for anybody. You didn't have to be in the biz to understand what they wanted. So that's the text of the bill. And then we see AB 232, an acronym that I had no idea what it stood for Committee on Education. I clicked on that, and that was the record of committee proceedings. So you can see here that it shows who has introduced the bill, and it goes through that history with a little bit more depth. So there's a public hearing held on May 25th. It shows the legislators who were present, absent, and one who was excused. And then there's a line or list that says appearances for. These are not links. These are all the people who provided testimony, either in person or written, in support of the bill. Appearances for means that they were in support of the bill. And it's quite a long list. In a separate link, I'll show you, you have record of all the written testimony from every one of these, from each person or organization represented here. There were no appearances against the bill, and there were no appearances just for information. And then we come to a list of registrations. And registrations for means people, organizations that are in support of the bill, but haven't had the opportunity, the time, to provide any testimony for it. There are no registrations against, and there are registrations for information only, again, meaning organizations or people who didn't have testimony, they don't have an opinion, they just want information.
You know, so what does that tell you looking at this? This is a bill that is not facing opposition, or if they have, they didn't get it together to oppose it in the Assembly Committee, right? Because as Rhonda just showed you, long list of people who showed up or sent testimony, and a long list of people who showed up just to register in favor of it. Nobody appearing against it or registering against it. So that tells you this has got broad support and no opposition.
Fabulous.
Can I just clarify one thing? Appearance for information only isn't people who are seeking information, it's people who are providing information. So sometimes, particularly if you're not a registered lobbyist and you have to keep how much time you spend lobbying to a limit, you may just register for information. So you, as an organization, so you may not want to register for or against, because that counts as lobbying, but just, I'm coming to this hearing and I'm going to provide some information for you. So Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice is not a lobbying organization, or we don't have a registered lobbyist on staff. So we might go to a hearing and just register as for information only. And I might testify and say, I'm not for or against this bill, but I just want to provide some information for you about how kids in our communities who are of Asian descent feel when their history is not represented in the classroom. So it's kind of a way of presenting information without actually overtly saying I'm for or against this bill.
Right, that pretty much says the same thing people were testifying were saying. They just stopped short of saying, and therefore I urge you to support this bill. They stopped right before there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And then this is what I found the most fascinating: LC bill hearing materials. Click on that link, click again. This is the Legislative Council collecting materials for this bill. These are all materials in support of this bill. And you get to a PDF that has, you know, pages upon pages upon pages of testimony in favor of the bill. And you can see it's from government officials, organization leaders, students, teachers. There was a family that owns a Taekwondo academy, which I particularly loved because in college I worked as the receptionist for a Taekwondo academy. So one of my many jobs I held, and it's really fascinating read. You have some high school students who are writing, and then you have, you know, organizational leaders with PhDs in their names as well. One thing that I heard often, or I read often, is that in Wisconsin has the third highest Hmong population in the country, which was really fascinating. So you can take just a great qualitative deep dive and read some of this testimony. And in some ways, it can be helpful to you if we ask you to, you know, please go forward and it's time to provide some testimony. You can read however much of this you want, and maybe even, you know, borrow some ideas from them. This was really a fabulous resource, and I certainly appreciate the time.
I just want to make one key clarification. You said this is reams and reams of material that's in support of the legislation. The only reason it's reams and reams all in support is because everybody who was there was in support. If there had been people who had testified against it, you would see there would be some opposing it too, which would also be valuable to look at, because if you looked at it and somebody said, why are we doing this? It's another mandate. There aren't even that many Hmong kids around. You'd be able to approach the legislature and say, that committee and say, they're wrong. Look at what it is or something. So you'll see the arguments for and against. In this case, there's only arguments for, because everybody testified for it. Also, you mentioned Legislative Council. Let me just point out that that's another one of the nonpartisan legislative agencies. There's 3 legislative agencies that support the legislature, the Legislative Audit Bureau, which does audits of different state agencies and state programs, the Legislative Reference Bureau that I mentioned that drafts the legislation, and the Legislative Council, which is attorneys for the most part who do research on various issues and staff the legislative committees to answer questions and support them and say, oh, has any other state ever done this? Let's see what New Hampshire did. Let's see what Nevada did. How did they pass it? Was it constitutional? Did it ever get challenged? Blah, blah, blah. And they are experts and sometimes do like kind of mock drafts before it goes to Legislative Reference Bureau for the official draft. Noah, maybe you had something more to say about Leg Council?
All I would say is, again, they're nonpartisan. They don't really work. They're not working for a particular legislator. In the federal system of government, if you're ever lobbying at the federal level, same thing. They have attorneys that work for those committees, but not necessarily for that member. And my guess is, or at least my experience was, that you may have a Leg Council attorney staffs a couple of committees, and they're there. So they're always going to be sitting right next to the committee chair at the hearings, available to answer questions and help that. But they're kind of the gatekeepers. They are a real power source of the committee, but they're not, they're not allowed to, nor should they take positions on the bill or help you get a hearing or stuff like that. They're not people to lobby, but they're very important people. They're the ones, if there's one person in a committee hearing that knows what's going on at any time, and you may be in a committee hearing where there's one person who knows what's going on, it is the Legislative Council attorney. They're very good at what they do.
Okay, thank you. So, like Betsy said, you can see who these different representatives are, who the different senators are. You can look them up. All you do is click on the name. I'm not going to click on anyone's name right now, but I'm going to click on the Committee on Education. If you click on the Committee of Education, you'll see that you see all the bills to the other side. And you see that the members are all listed. There's a chair and a vice chair, and they're listed. It looks like maybe, I'm not sure what the order is. And
the order is all the majority party first. So all the Republicans in this case first. And I'd have to click on them all. I think there's at most maybe 4 Democrats on the committee. So you'll see all the Republicans, like I said, all the majority party first.
Okay, so I click on, let's say I click on Representative Binsfeld, and here she is. She's from Sheboygan. So let's say we see that we have 2 people who live in Sheboygan. So we would ask those 2 people specifically. I'm going to turn my light on in a minute. We'll ask those 2 people specifically, can you please write to your representative, because she's on the committee, and it's really important for representatives and senators to hear from their constituents. Okay, so we would see who on our legislative tracking group who in this advocacy and tracking group maybe lives in Sheboygan. Can they do that? And if you don't live in Sheboygan, we would ask that you can still write to this congressperson, but we'd also ask, can you write to your own congressperson and ask them to contact the people on the committee and show their support for this bill. And again, we're talking about AB 232, so we're talking about a bill that we are supporting.
Okay. Rhonda, not Congress. This is the state legislature. They're a senator, they're assembly rep.
Sorry. Right. Sorry about that. Right. The representative. So you can see there's many representatives here in the Assembly Committee on Education. And again, we would ask, if any of these are your representatives, please send them an email, make a phone call, and we have a template for that. And then if they aren't, you can still email them, call them, but we would ask that you also email or call your own representative and ask them on behalf of their constituent, please support this bill. So, and you can just keep going through links and find information. If you were really interested in other bills, just to see what the other bills look like, you can. I took a bit of a deep dive into that the other day. It's really very user-friendly. The important thing is we're going to help you know which steps we need you to take. We're not asking you to track every bill in the legislature. We're asking you that when you get an email from us to please open it. And if there's something that you can do to support a bill that we believe enhances social equity, please do that. Contact the congressperson who may be your own congressperson, or your legislator. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Your legislator. Contact your legislator. Let them know that this is important to you, and ask them on your behalf to contact the people on the committee. Sorry about some of my my misnomers there. I'm as you can see, I'm still learning too. I'm still learning. So we will continue to keep you all posted. We have a really tremendous group from all over the state, and we appreciate the time that you're giving tonight to understand what's going on, and your patience with a couple of my vocabulary mistakes there. But the important thing is please stay active in this and continue to learn and work with us so we can make our legislators know the issues that we care about. Okay, I think I will stop the share now. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn my light on in a moment after we have any questions. Okay.
Penny, I see your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I'm not quick enough to get into the chat. So, if we learn there's a bill in the Senate or the Assembly, and looking at the text doesn't make it really clear to us, would the best person to call would be one of the authors. In the past, I sat on a committee for the League of Women Voters at the state level and worked on transportation. And one year there were just dozens of transportation bills. And I had a heck of a time finding someone to explain some of them to me. I mean, I would start with my own representative, but, you know, they apparently can't keep track of everything.
Sure, you're asking if you needed help in understanding a bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. I would call one of the sponsors of the bill saying, I don't understand this, but you can also use the links that Rhonda showed you and plop that bill in there, and that'll give you the text of the bill and the short phrase that describes it. I would invite you, Penny, at this stage in our process together to give Rhonda or Angie or me a call about it. We'll tell you whether or not this project has zeroed in on that bill and decided that we're taking a stance on it, but we also might be able to just help you with it. But if you can ask your own legislator, it's very likely they don't know about that bill yet, but as a service to you, they should be able to find out and say, oh yes, this hasn't come to anything that Representative so-and-so is on, but if it does, we'll keep on it, but let me look it up for you and I can find it. But it's also a good chance they'll send you to the website. Noah, you look like you're going to add something.
Yeah, one quick thing. I was going to reference this, and I hope this can be included in the links that get sent out later. I'm dropping it in the chat now. It's something I could talk more about it in a second. I think my turn is coming up or whatever, but it's the lobbying profile essentially for every bill. Rabbi Margulies was talking earlier about some of the lobbying rules and ethics and all that. You don't have to worry about any of that as a citizen and all that. None of you are going to be violating that. So you don't have any reporting obligations there or anything. But this website's really interesting. And while we were on this chat, I looked up AB 232, and you can actually search by legislative proposal, all these other things. So sometimes, Penny, we would use that. I use that personally, or we would use that whatever side of an issue you're on. There may be interest groups that you're aligned with that you really like, or conversely, there may be interest groups you really don't like. And they will have registered interest on that bill. So if I feel strongly about a particular proposal, let's say related to guns in Wisconsin, I may want to see what the NRA thinks, or I may want to think what Everytown thinks. Two very opposing views on that. That maybe give me a little bit of a hint as to what I think about this bill, because I hear you understanding the text and the way it has to be drafted in accordance with the statutes by the LRB attorneys can be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing at times. And that's just another website I found where there's interest groups registering that I may agree with. Just like when you're voting in your city election or county election, you look at who's endorsing this person. It's the same kind of a idea, I think, that can be helpful. Again, it's not going to give you, it has all the other information that Rhonda was laying out, links to that as well. But it can just be a little bit of a clue that sometimes helps on a bill.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I did save that link, so I can include it in our other links and in the email I'm going to send out to everyone in a couple of days. All right. And next we have Angela Hicks.
Hi, I'm Angela Hicks, and I'm a staff member of the Wisconsin Council of Churches as a small field coordinator for the metro area. And I'm also working on their community health program. I was asked to be a part of this, and I am honored to work with Rhonda and Betsy on this project, and I'm in the learning process as well.
And I believe we are going to ask Noah Seligman to come on. And Angela, do you have the information?
Yeah, I have the information. Yes. And next up, we would like to introduce Noah Seligman, who previously worked as a legislative aide for 3 different Wisconsin legislators in the state capitol. As an aide, Noah fielded hundreds of phone calls, letters, and emails, both from people who lived in those legislators' districts and also outside his district. Noah has generously offered to give us some tips for contacting legislators. As you'll hear, it's pretty simple and straightforward, and not anywhere as scary or intimidated as you might think. Take it away, Noah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. So I also actually, one thing I do want to note, because this was actually helpful for me on both sides, is I was a lobbyist for a couple of years, fresh out of university, working in energy and telecommunications. And I'll mention a little bit why the topics matter there. But so I kind of saw it from both sides a little bit. Now, context, I worked in Wisconsin 2007 to 2011, which is suddenly a long time ago. And I was there I was working in the state assembly during what is now Act 10, I believe, in Wisconsin. And I would imagine some of your faces look familiar. No, but I would imagine some of you were around the Capitol Square at that time and burning up phone lines in those days as well. And it's great to have your energy still here. So, I think it's interesting working in the legislature, working with legislators. There's folks that are there generally because they want to serve people, or they're just amiable business people from the Chamber of Commerce breakfast. They're working for their constituents. A lot of folks, they're not making a huge amount of money. The staffers certainly aren't making a huge amount of money. They're working long hours. It can be a very demanding job. They get a little per diem money. And the reason I'm mentioning that is again, thinking back to why they're there, what they're supposed to be doing. It's a hard job commuting back and forth to their district, depending on where they live in the state. The per diem they get for being in the Capitol doesn't really cover for those folks who live farther away and have to rent an apartment or hotels and food and stuff. So it is a difficult job. And just know that the legislative staffers, there's kind of two groups that I am broadly generalizing here. So there's obviously variations within it, but there are a lot of folks that have worked in the legislature a long time that really know the process, know the rules, know the committee schedule, all that. And then because the hours are long and the pay is poor, there's a lot of folks that they churn through young people like me. I was kind of the right age to work there, where I didn't have a family to support or kids of my own or anything like that. And I could work those long hours. Most critically, I was also willing to not on state time work on campaigns, because you can't do any campaign activity in the Capitol. I would literally on my lunch break go sometimes down to the party office to stuff a mailing, or if I had to take a phone call that I knew was related to something, I would step out of the building, clock out my time. There's rules around that. My point is there's kind of two groups of people: the folks that are really good on the institutional process, the folks that are there that really their strength maybe in some of the campaign work involved. They're very important. They're very dedicated people. And they have different expertise. So oftentimes, as other speakers tonight have noted, you calling will have maybe know a little bit more about the bill, what it does. They're tracking, every office will have huge file folders of every possible bill number stacked in their big filing cabinets, bookshelves in their office. And it's just impossible to keep track of. Everybody will literally look at, what's on the calendar today, and then pull their bill files out. And in there will be kind of everything that Rhonda laid out of the bill history and lobbying principles and who's registered on the bill. So when you're calling them, the first thing they're going to think about is their district, their constituents. So we had, when I worked there, they had a program that they called Forward that was kind of their actually own database. Any of you have used a CRM tool, maybe if you've heard of the term Salesforce, it's the same kind of idea where you're tracking your constituents. They'll call in. We had a record of everybody that had registered to vote in the district, obviously not how they voted or anything like that, but just that they were in our district. And then when they would call in, I could make a little data entry and make sure I got their phone number, their email address. I would always add them to our e-newsletter, because they could always opt out. And then check their address, make sure that they were in our district. Sometimes folks would call, they weren't our constituent. I would gladly look it up for them and direct them to that office if they needed to. On the legislature's homepage, and I'll put this in the chat now, because you may be either yourself totally reasonable to not necessarily know or remember who your legislator is, or if you're talking to a friend, getting them involved, they may not know who their legislator is. There's a handy tool right on the homepage of the Wisconsin legislature that you can look up your legislator by your address to know who to contact, because that really was always the most important to us of what did our district think. People would call from other places in Wisconsin, and it was fine to hear from them, but if they weren't in our district, didn't matter as much to me. So identifying yourself early in the call that you live in the district or something like that, and if you're connected to any kind of an interest group or coalition of some kind, that's always helpful as a prompt, because generally the staffer probably maybe has set the schedule, knows if they've, we met with this group recently or didn't. I should pause here to note, you may also be talking to an intern probably from the University of Wisconsin that could be 18 or 19 years old at times. So speaking slowly, clearly, briefly is always helpful. And that's not to denigrate our wonderful interns I worked with and oversaw, but it probably takes less to overwhelm them, let's say. That's a nice way. The bill number, knowing if it's this or that, because then the SB 240 we're talking about here, or AB 232 with one sentence on what it does. Just, I'm calling about this bill number. This is what it does. I'm hoping that they will do, what is the action? That's really the thing you're mainly thinking about. And then you can briefly explain, what you're looking for or what's next, and try and get the kind of answer from them. There's a pretty good chance, my guess is that your person you're talking to, certainly if it's an intern or a staffer, may not know what their boss thinks. If the boss will support the bill, if the boss will support a committee hearing, if the boss would vote on it on the floor, or any of those other pieces to the process, they may not know that, and they may have to get back to you, and that's okay. But just trying to at least make that ask of them, where you're from, why you're calling, what you want from them. Those are the main things we're kind of trying to convey in our brief phone call with them or in an email. I doubt this is going to be much of an issue for anybody here, but courtesy is always important. I dealt with people that were calling on issues that I knew I didn't need to wait for my boss. I knew that my boss was not in support of that. And during, so there's obviously never any reason to lose your cool or get angry or get frustrated. But there's a little courtesy always goes a long way in these situations. And arguments very rarely produced anything. There were definitely times I fielded calls from people just looking to pick a fight with me about something. And it was just kind of easy enough to redirect them, but that wasn't particularly helpful. But making sure there's a clear ask and why you're calling is probably the most important thing. From there, but I do want to stress, I think your time as well is best served talking to your legislator, and then talking to the committee is helpful. When you're for this bill, for example, on education, knowing that you're part of a broader coalition that's looking for something as well. I had people call me and they would say, "Well, I'm a taxpayer." Great, so am I. Everyone's a taxpayer. That's just how taxes work. But it doesn't move me. If you're calling from Green Bay and my legislators from Eau Claire or whatever, I don't, that's not how this works. I have to listen to my district and my people. This may be a me thing more than generally, but I can tell you from the people I work with, nobody was really interested when we took a call if you had voted for us, if you had donated to us or stuff like that. Those political things, the always popular, I won't vote for you again if you don't support this. Never really set much. Maybe that's because a lot of the legislators I worked for were in very safe districts anyway, but it was not, that seemed needlessly antagonistic whenever I heard that from a caller or saw that in an email. That was just not really, why the legislator was there, why I was there, anything like that. What more, Betsy, Rabbi Margulies, or Ms. Hicks, Rhonda, anybody that like me to cover or talk about? I think the main takeaway is that these folks are overworked, and there's a lot of situations, especially when I was working in like energy and telecommunications, where even though I was 22 and was maybe knew all what a 22-year-old would know about telecommunications regulation in Wisconsin, I was still way ahead of the staffer and the legislator at times, because they just can't reasonably get their arms around everything that's in front of them. So I think you can speak to them certainly with plenty of confidence that you are well versed on these issues and know it well.
Noah, thank you so much. I just want to follow up on one thing that you said about that the aide or the legislator doesn't care about your saying, I'm not going to vote for you if you don't do what I want. I just want to stress, if you are calling on your own as a private individual, you can say whatever you want. If you are calling as a volunteer for Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice or the Wisconsin Council of Churches or any of our community or Creating Beloved community partners as part of this project, and you say, I'm calling as a volunteer for, you may not threaten to vote or not vote for them. That violates our 501c3 status.
You don't want to check the internal, we can drop the Internal Revenue Code into the chat for everyone to take a look at section 501c3.
Yeah, so thank you. So a 501c3 do's or don'ts training is a separate thing that we have done in the past, and I'm sure we'll be doing again in the future. But just in brief, you may not endorse a candidate, oppose a candidate, endorse a political party, or oppose a political party if you are speaking as a volunteer or on behalf of any of our organizations or any of your congregations, which also are 501c3 entities. So there's tons of nuance in there and things that we could go into, but we don't have time tonight. But we can also send out some information for you about the C3 do's and don'ts.
And I just had one more thing. I had been thinking about this today, knowing this call was coming, is that, we're into, It's an important day. But in September, in the fall here in Wisconsin, they're going to be in session, through into maybe March. And then your legislators are going to be in their district a lot because it's 2024 and everybody wants to be on the campaign trail for themselves or their friends. They're running for reelection, or their support. If they're in the Senate, maybe they're helping somebody else on the Senate side. That's a great opportunity for you because the legislator is going to be out in the district. It's great to be on there. Everybody has a website. They're all over social media, I'm sure now, e-newsletters, things like that, to know where your legislators are, because it made such a difference when there was a face to the name for either my boss or even for us when we were occasionally in the district, that we knew these people. And you're going to have opportunities depending on where you live, where, especially coming into this election year, which will be on us sooner than we think, where they're going to be in their district and they want to meet people. They're going to be at every parade. They're going to be at every community festival. They're going to be at every Chamber of Commerce, breakfast thing. And that's an opportunity if you have the time. And I'm not, again, saying you have to pay to go to their fundraiser or anything like that, but just they're going to be in the district. They're going to be out and about, and those relationships matter. These are people, and it's a very different conversation, I think, when it's, oh yeah, this person called and I remember meeting them here or there, which is another little kernel you can work into your pitch when you say, oh yeah, we spoke about this at this event. In theory, one of the things that last thing I want to convey, and this struck me because I interned in the state Senate in Wisconsin for a while, for a couple summers in college, and then in the U.S. Senate for a semester of college, is so much of the job of the legislator does not matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. How you ultimately vote, obviously that's gonna change based on which side of the aisle you're on. But so much of the job in terms of responding to constituents, somebody called us. I was working at a time where the economy was still kind of feeling the effects of the 2008 downturn. We had far too many people calling us that needed help with, something with the Department of Workforce Development for their unemployment benefits. Didn't care how they voted, what their donation history was, their other thing. There were people that needed help. And so I think so much of that job doesn't really change based on your Republican or your Democrat. There's a lot more similarities than it might seem based on whatever MSNBC is saying tonight or CNN or anything like that. For the job itself, there's very little that separates them in terms of what they should be doing if they're doing the job correctly.
Yeah, and I just had two other things too. Thanks, Karen. One is that, as irritated as you might be with a particular legislator on their position on something, this is not the only issue that you'll ever be dealing with them. And if they know, oh, Betsy Abramson, she was such a crank on AB 232, and they see my name come up on their caller ID when I'm calling next month or next session on something or another else, or I was rude or whatever, live to fight another day, both for the sake of the organizations you represent and for the causes you care about. Because sometimes you're surprised. There was a guy in the Wisconsin Assembly. I didn't think I would ever think he would ever vote on anything the way I wanted. And then he turned out to be really great on like predatory loans. And I thought, who would have thunk it? That doofus. So I'm glad I didn't, shoot my mouth off and say something stupid to him. And the final thing, I think you maybe mentioned this, Noah, and it's on that page 10 of those materials, is, the legislators work for you. So it's perfectly cool to say, can I count on Senator so-and-so to indeed vote for this, or call the committee chair and ask them to schedule the hearing or something. Now they may blow you off. Yeah, I'll relay it to them and let you know. And you can say, when would be a good time to call back to see if they've made their decision. There's a very small line between there and being pushy or obnoxious about something. So I'm tempted to cross it way too much. So be careful about that. But you can ask that to try to get them to take a position, or let you know when you can call back to find out what that position is. And it may still be, I don't know, okay, you've gotten the message, they're blowing you off. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Hang up politely.
Well, I want to just thank Noah so much for the really helpful information he has given. And so all we have heard is not complicated or hard. Just be prepared, Be clear, be concise, and be specific. Who are you? What issue or bill are you calling about? And what are you asking the legislator to do? Oh, yes, definitely. Be polite. Thanks again, Noah. Back to you, Rhonda.
Okay, thank you so much. We seem to be running a little behind, which is okay. We wanted to make sure we got a lot of information. One thing I want to make sure people know is we are available to answer all questions. And also, as the WIVIC statewide organizer, I get a lot of information regarding nonpartisan advocacy days. And in these advocacy days, you have the opportunity to meet as a group at the state capitol and go through a certain issue that is important to the organizer of this event. And that organizer, very much like what we've done in this Zoom, will train people on how to go to the legislators' offices and speak with, you're right, Noah, typically the legislative aides or the interns, and they'll allow you time to get comfortable. They typically have you partner with another person. And if this is something that you would like to keep track of, in addition to this legislative tracking group, please let me know, because all of the advocacy days that I hear about, they are all nonpartisan. They're issue-based, but they're nonpartisan. And the organizers are often very good about making sure people are comfortable if it is their first time. I remember going to my first advocacy day, and I was really scared to go to talk to a legislator. And you're right, Noah, I ended up talking to an intern 2 or 3 times, and it is a little less, it's a little less daunting to talk to an intern. But they pair you up, and please, if this is something you're interested in, I can jot your name down. And when I hear of advocacy days, I know of an advocacy day happening in a couple of weeks, I can let you know. And like I said, these are all nonpartisan advocacy days, so they will continue to train all of you in nonpartisan advocacy work. So what we have is opportunity to answer a few more questions, and then we can break. I don't think we have time to break into a group to practice writing a letter, but what we can do is send you the template. So in addition to the links that we've provided in this chat, I will have a nice organized email of all of the links, explaining what the links are. And one of the links will also be a template for you to write to the legislators when we say, oh, it's time to take action. The bill is this bill right now that we are in favor of. We're asking you to contact legislators and send this email or make a phone call in support of this bill. And one last very important call to action is, we didn't want to forget, so Rabbi Bonnie, we're going to have you talk about this very important call to action happening in October.
Thank you, Rhonda. So those of you who came to this through taking a faithful stand for equity know that we have monthly webinars. And because tonight we were focusing on the legislation to require AAPI education in our public schools, I wanted to let you all know that our October webinar, which is going to be on October 10th, is actually focusing on this particular bill. And Representative Francesca Hong, who's one of the main sponsors of the bill, is going to be our speaker. And I believe that she is also inviting other people who were part of the team that created this piece of legislation to be speakers along with her that evening. So we don't yet have the registration link up for the October webinar, but we will have it up shortly. And we'll have, you can also see on YouTube in the Taking a Faithful Stand for Equity YouTube channel, you can see our August webinar that talked about Act 31 and Native American education in our public schools and the current status of that. So look to the WIVIC e-news or look to the emails from Taking a Faithful Stand for Equity in the next couple of weeks. The registration link for the October 10th webinar will be up within the next week or two at the most.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. If there are questions that perhaps you wanted to ask in a less formal setting, a couple of us can stay on and answer anything that any questions you may have, any concerns you may have. Please don't hesitate to stay on. I have another 15 minutes or so. I think Betsy and Angela do as well. And I really appreciate the time that you're putting into not just tonight, but the legislative tracking and advocacy. It's not exactly sexy work. So it's really great that we have a lot of people who are committed to social equity. Thank you. And thanks to Betsy for leading our leadership team and for Rabbi Bonnie for establishing this group. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.